Hello, everyone. You're listening to a conversation that's part of the Centre for Future Nature's series of stories on commoning and enclosure. My name is Anoushka, and these conversations invite people to share their experiences, ideas, and knowledge on commoning, including the already existing practices and relations that confront structures and systems of enclosure. Today, I'm joined by Nathan Oxley, the Communications Coordinator at Future Natures, and together we spoke to two people involved in a campaign against a proposed lithium mine in Portugal. Both activists, Carla and Francisco, take us through a journey into Covas do Barroso, the village that the mine would enclose, degrade, and change forever. In 2017, London-based mining company Savannah Resources, referred to as Savannah in this episode, announced its plans to develop one of Western Europe's first large-scale lithium mines. Since then, local mobilizations have been resisting the mine. Carla and Francisco draw on their lived experiences of life and struggle in this region of northern Portugal, a place where land governance as a commons has been going throughout history. We discuss the role of emotion, memory, and belonging to the land, as well as the broader issues brought by the mining project, which values the village solely for what lies beneath it. Demand for lithium in Europe is predicted to grow fourfold to account for a quarter of global demand by 2030. Covas do Barroso and other villages in places like Sweden and France have become one of the assumed sacrifice zones to make this possible. This conversation goes beyond the promise of green jobs and asks who the mine will actually benefit and what transition justice would look like beyond green capitalism. Our guests talk through the social relationships of commoning rooted to place, but also how new relationships have been cultivated through the struggle. The song you hear throughout this episode is from a demonstration camp that happened in Covas do Barroso in August 2023.
My name is Carla Gomes. I'm from Covas do Barroso. I'm a local from the village that we're discussing here. I don't live there permanently, but I go back twice a month or even more often if I can. But I don't live too far away. I live about 90 kilometers away from Covas.
Hi, my name is Francisco Venes. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Coimbra. I'm doing a PhD project on feminist political ecology, working with women struggling against mining projects in Portugal and in Ecuador. So my connection with Covas do Barroso was in the context of this project. And I lived in Covas do Barroso for about a year in 2020, 2021. And I've been coming back there often since then.
Carla, could you sort of introduce us a bit to Covas do Barroso, maybe paint a picture of what the village is like, what the area is like, and just introduce us a bit to what's going on with the mine?
Sure. So Covas do Barroso is a small village in the north of Portugal. And it's quite a rural area, and most people there live off the land, and they raise cattle and small animals as well. Even people that have other jobs that are not necessarily related to agriculture, they still have their small lands, pieces of land where they raise some vegetables, fruits, things like that. So it's a population that's very connected to the land. And of course, it's not a perfect place. It's got a very deficient, it doesn't have a lot of public services because again, it's quite rural. So schools and health services are not very close by. We don't have that in the village itself. You always have to travel to get those kind of services. Public transport is also not very regular or not very frequent. So we've got our troubles, but people there are able to overcome all, have been able to overcome all of that for quite a few centuries now. It's also a community that's been quite affected, like many other communities in the rural regions of Portugal, affected by the immigration. So, by mass exodus of people that have been going to the seaside cities or else other countries. So it's lost a big mass of those people, mainly during the 60s, the 70s. So what we know is that the people who live there now actually want to live there now because they had the chance to not live there. So about the whole mine process, we first found out about it in 2018, and it was completely accidental. One of the people from the village, so this is a person from the village that lives in the UK, and they found out that there was this project to extend a mining license that was already there, and the license had been expanded and had been modified to include lithium. So this was not an information that was ever given to us by the company or by the government. It was a complete surprise. And then when we started to find out, we realized that the plan was to make a very large open pit mine that would be taking over all the natural resources that the people there had so far. So we started to gather our strengths and we started to fight it as we could, and we're still doing that 5 years later.
Yeah, if you could just give us a picture of where things are right now.
In May, the Portuguese Environment Agency provided a conditioned positive license, so basically an authorization for the project to go ahead, but they still have some loops and processes they have to go through. But at this point, the company does not own, well, they virtually own nothing of the land. So most of the land there is still either private or public property of everyone in the village. So yeah, that's basically where we are. Maybe Francisco wants to complete the information.
I would like to add something to what Carlos said. It's about the land, the property forms of land. I think it's important, especially here in Future Natures, but what Anoushka was saying about commoning being so important. So Carla mentioned public lands, but in fact, we have two kinds of public lands in Covas do Barroso. We have public lands in the sense of belonging to the state. So it's the lands owned by the local parish, and then we have the common lands called the baldios in Portugal. It's a very specific form of common land in Portugal, from Portugal, that is owned by the people in the community, especially the people who work the land there, but also the people who reside or are from the village, as Carla, for example. And these lands, these baldios lands, are very, very important for the struggle against this project, because most of the mining, the concession given to the mine, like this area that's where they have mining rights, where Savannah has mining rights, is common land. So these commons are key to the process of resistance against this project.
Yeah, Francisco, how did you come to be involved and connected with this?
I would probably have to go a little back in time. I was living in Ecuador for many years, since 2013 until the end of 2018, and I was pretty much involved in anti-mining struggles in Ecuador. That's where I entered in contact with these struggles. I became involved first in connection with some territories opposing mining projects, then mostly in the urban areas, trying to bring more people from urban context into this struggle. And then I decided to do my PhD related to anti-mining resistance as a consequence of this. It just happened that this resistance was starting in Portugal as well. The moment I was deciding on my case studies, so I decided to go and visit Covas one day, and I just first fell in love with the village. As Carla was saying, it's probably one of the most beautiful places I have seen in Portugal. People are amazing, and then I became involved with the struggle because for me, doing research is also about getting involved in the process research with the people I'm doing research with. I can't just be a mere spectator. So yes, it's now part of my anti-mining struggle, like part of my process of resisting mining projects, being part of this struggle in Covas de Barroso.
Super interesting. I just wondered, you both talked about, this is several years ago now that things started. Carla, I just wondered, what were your first memories of it? And also, I guess related to that, like, how do people cope with the struggle being quite a long-term one, drawing out over several years and lots of battles and victories and pushbacks as well?
Well, there's two very important points to that, because on the one hand, we feel like we've already delayed this for quite a few years. So their plans were initially to get started in 2020, I think. So we've already been able to push back and delay this whole process. However, it's also very tiring. And I say this as someone who doesn't have their livelihood in jeopardy. So I'm not even one of the most affected ones, but most of my family is. So most of my friends, my neighbors are. So it's the community that I've known all my life, and I still feel like very much a part of it. So it's notorious that at least a big majority of people are against this, but the struggle is tiring. And sometimes it feels like we're alone, like nobody is listening to us, like the political and social powers are not on our side. However, I think that it brings the community closer. So everyone relies on each other. But, it's exhausting and frustrating sometimes. And it does cause trouble. It does cause trouble in the social fabric of the village. In some cases, it puts neighbors against neighbors and family members against family members. And that's terrible because, conflict is already a part of the human experience. But when the conflict is brought to you by something outside of your usual life, of your usual day to day, and it's a lot. It's more difficult to cope with. So, yeah, it hasn't been a great experience in that sense, in the sense that it does put people against each other sometimes, or it exhausts their resources and also their energy, like all kinds of energy, the physical one, but also the emotional energy that they have. It's a big part of what we live now. It's just knowing that tomorrow is another day that we're going to struggle. However, it's not all bad. Okay, so it does bring the community together. It does bring a lot of people from outside of our community into it. Francisco has lived there and is a regular visitor. Well, he's not a visitor anymore. He's from Covas do Barroso officially, as far as we're concerned. But there are a lot of people that heard about Covas do Barroso because of this, and in the meantime have become a part of our community, which is exactly what we need, is to have people come in and stay and live with us and share on the struggle, but also on the good things that we still have.
As you mentioned, the social fabric of the community and the very intricate nature of the human relationships that happen within the community itself. But I wondered, Francisco, actually, if you had some things to say about this, but obviously Carla as well, please do jump in. But this role of the state within all of this, and how is the corporation being held accountable throughout the process? Obviously, the majority of the community does not want the mine there. So how does it work in terms of the relationship with the state?
Okay, so first I'll probably start with the central state. Portugal is a very centralized country in terms of power. So everything is mostly concentrated in Lisbon. There's of course local governments, but they have not that many power in these kind of decisions, even though they have great importance locally. And I think the relationship between the central state and the Barroso region has been very well described by Aida, who is a woman from Covas do Barroso. I've interviewed for the project. Is one of the most important people in resisting this project, and she told me once that like the state never cared about us, and now they care about us when it's time to come here and destroy the village and just take the profits from these minerals. So yeah, it's been a long time of state absence from the region, and I think in part the process of autonomy that I've developed that are so well developed in the region are a consequence of this absence of the state. And now suddenly it is important for the state because there's some resource there to be extracted. So the relationship between the state and the company is of total support. So there's even sometimes the perception is that there's not even the separation that could be somehow reassuring in terms of this ideal that for me does not exist of the well-regulated, well-done mining. But even this dystopian idea that doesn't even show, because the state is just being the representative of the company's interest here and the lithium lobby here in Portugal. And we saw it so clearly with the whole environmental assessment process, how the state brought participation processes to a minimum required by law, how they were not interested at all in having meaningful participation processes and spaces where people could be heard, and what they would say would be actually considered. So everything was just like a checkbox in terms of legal requirements, and also how the different state institutions that are related to mining regulation of energy and mining projects have been subservient to the company's interests. So there's no separation at all. Then going back to local government, surprisingly, because for me, from my experience in Ecuador in other areas, it's actually a surprise that the local mayor is opposing the project and has been consistently opposing the project in the past few years. It's something you don't see often in this kind of struggles. And it has been important to have his support. And it doesn't mean that the whole local government structure shares his perspective, but he in particular has been opposing the project and has been very public in his opposition. And I think it's the most important aspect of this is that this reassures a lot of people.
Thank you for that. Carla, did you have anything to say in terms of your experience with the role of the state, and also, as Francisco was just saying, about the role of the mayor and his consistent opposition to the mine?
As Francisco said, local government does not have a great pull with these decisions. But yes, it's very important that someone in a place of authority is bolstering the people's opposition and is seen to oppose it as well, because that actually provides a level of protection, I would say. If people had to struggle both against the local government and the central government, it would be a much more difficult struggle, I would say. So it does help that we don't have to fight the local governments, and also that we feel the support, because it's not even like, it's not a muted opinion that the mayor has. So he actively speaks out against the mining project.
Great, thank you. I just wondered how the contract and between the state and the corporation, can you explain a little bit as to how it's possible that this is still going ahead despite a member of government that's opposing it?
So in the end, the central state has the capacity of declaring this project national interest. And by declaring the project national interest, it can force it to go. It can just overcome this blockades you put in the way. So I think, although it's important that we have local government stalling the project the way they can, in all the ways they can, I really believe, and I've repeated this so many times, also in Covas, in assembly meetings. It's like the most important thing for me is people's unity against this project, and especially people's unity around the common lands and the Baldias. Because even if the state comes and says, so this is a national interest project, we are going to expropriate these lands. They legally can't do that. But if people are together and they will stall it for so long, they can stall it for so long that eventually it's going to be impossible for the company to go on spending money on a project that does not proceed. So that's for me where the power rests, is people staying together, and because it can last for decades. We were talking before how this is a long process of resistance. It's actually, if we compare this with other resistances around the world, it's actually very short resistance. We're talking about, in Ecuador, there's decade-long, like 2 decades, 3 decade-long resistance to mining. But actually, I think people can, even if it's declared national interest, people can stall this for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And eventually the company will give up. And this does not mean that the threat goes away, because the threat will never go away in this when there's minerals underground. The threat goes away when lithium ends up being interesting in terms of ends up being a commodity. as long as lithium is a relevant commodity, the threat will be there, even if you stop this company, even if you stall, and it's good, it's important to have these partial victories where you can rest from all these years of struggle, but the threat will always be there as long as lithium is a commodity.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Carla, come in.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say that our plan is also, not our plan, but the resistant method is also a way to use capitalism against capitalism. So basically, as Francisco was saying, as long as lithium is a relevant asset, it's a relevant commodity, we're still going to be threatened by it. However, if our legal resistance that can go on for decades, as he was saying, hopefully will end up making the company give up because it's going to be too expensive. And and every year they're losing more and more money on a project that does not go on. And obviously their investors are not happy about that. And well, if this goes on for 10, 15 years, who's going to be left to support this financially? It's not going to be a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, kind of thinking about just the role of the strength of just being able to keep going and persevering and not giving up, in a sense. And it goes back to what we talked about before, about, how do people keep going? And I wondered about people's relationship to land and to the landscape and the attachment that they feel to it. And it's not just a kind of to do with livelihoods. Livelihoods are really important. People's incomes are really important, but it's also to do with something more emotional and people's memories and their feelings about the place where they live and their feeling of belonging. Maybe I just wondered if you could say something about that, either from your own perspective or more generally.
Yeah, I think that's very notorious, especially in small communities where the land is part of the community. It's not just a resource, or the water, the landscape. It's not a resource. It's not seen as just a resource, but it's also very respected. It's considered a part of the community. So whether we're speaking about the land or the water or nature in general, it's treated with respect and with the knowledge that they've built for centuries that you're going to be treated by the land with the same treatment that you give to it. So if you respect it, it's going to help you as well, and it's going to be friendlier. So Covas do Barroso is considered as a globally important agricultural heritage system by FAO, which means that the way that people relate themselves to the land it's also emotional, of course. So this recognition, it's happened because the relationship between the people and the land is respectful and it's sustainable, because people have developed this system of using the land and the water in a very responsible way and in a way that sustains the land and the water itself. The way that they treat the land is really as part of the community. The land also depends on the way that people treat it. And if you put a mine in it, then the land is not going to respond well to that. And the water will be gone and all that. And the animals, biodiversity, everything would be wrecked. And the whole structure of the land would be wrecked. And this is not particular to Covas do Barroso. Of course, we're speaking about this particular place, but this is common to everywhere where you place a huge open pit mine. it's going to suffer the consequences, and it's not recoverable. It just doesn't happen.
It's true. This is not exclusive to Covas de Barroso, but for me, what was really fascinating about Covas de Barroso and the Barroso region is that it's not that there's only that there are communities, that these communities are alive, really alive. The community made of the people who live there, their relationship with non-human nature, they form this whole community that is really, really alive. And for me, this was a huge difference, especially compared to processes where the mining companies have been somehow successful in destroying the community. Even in cases where resistance achieved victories and meaningful victories, the community has been destroyed. And for me, the fact that here the community is so strong, it's so alive, and in the community, I mean the people with non-human nature, is so important for this resistance. And it's, I think, the most important thing to care for, to go on with this struggle. Something I remember is that how people, you were mentioning this before when you addressed Carla, how people, like some people focus more on the income aspect or the importance of the land. But for me, the interesting thing is that the women I did research with each had a specific way of framing this relationship. And even though some of those who work the land on a daily basis and depend on it as part of their income would stress this aspect, they would also stress the emotional attachment to certain places in the community. For me, it was really interesting to see how people who, in the case of Katerina, for example, who was born as Carla, she was born in the village, she grew up in the village, but now she lives in London, how she frames relationship with Covas de Barroso, you know, how she says it's part of my identity. These people that live there, they are my neighbors, even if they are not my actual neighbors. How Jessica, for example, someone who never lived in Covas de Barroso, she's the daughter of people coming from this region. She grew up in Paris. How she frames a relationship with the territory and how strong that relationship is with this community. It's amazing to see all these differences and how strong the community is if it has the capacity of maintaining these strong bonds between the people and the territory and nature, even when you're not actually living there.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot when it comes to the prospect of a mine kind of entering that space, that landscape that you've been describing, and as Francisco's been explaining, how the non-human nature is completely entangled with the human communities that live in these areas. And when it comes to communicating these issues to the wider world or the wider community, whether that's in Portugal or further afield, it's often can become like an abstract issue that is sort of over there or outside of their own lived experiences. Whereas for you, it's within the places that you inhabit and within the networks that you engage with. And I've been thinking recently about this term. I don't know if you've come across it. It's called solastalgia. Came up, I think it was an Australian psychologist who coined the term, but it's been used for several decades now, especially with people that are studying eco-anxiety and climate anxiety. And it refers to the feelings that arise when someone's sense of place is threatened or violated. So it's a kind of melancholy or homesickness for your home, although you haven't lost the home yet. It's this or an anticipated sense of transformation that could happen to your home. So when a threat like a mine emerges, it can sort of evoke this preemptive stress felt by people who are anticipating some kind of environmental change that might happen, which in turn kind of affects your sense of home and your sense of place. So I just wondered if, to both of you, really, to speak a bit about how the role of emotion and memory have been important in the movements that you've been part of. So obviously, Francisco, you've also worked elsewhere. So maybe you can speak to this topic more broadly, but also, Carla, we're very interested to know how potentially maybe use this as a tool within the strength building within your movement.
Okay, so obviously, I think that the emotional responses are not only to the threat of the mine or other extractive projects. It's also the emotions of struggling against this on a daily basis. For me, the biggest difference probably between Covas do Barroso and the case I was working with in Ecuador is these different moments the resistance is. So in Barroso, we have the community, as I said before, the community is alive, the community is united, the social tissue is strong. And this is a big aspect in putting on stopping and on blocking the mine. On the other hand, in the Ecuadorian case, there's the community is dead. They still manage to stop the project. So they have a court injunction to the project that has been in place since 2018. But the mining interests are still operating and are still contributing to divide people. And the scars are so profound, they're so strong that people have no hope. When we talk with people about, do you think it's possible to have a community again, for people to get together again, to go over these divisions between miners and anti-miners? People say, I find it very hard for that to happen. Maybe in a very long time. And actually, they say the only solution might be time. But overall, the sense is of despair. There's this spirit of division, the threat, the violence looming all over all the time because of the presence of illegal miners, and this is fostered by mining interests in the region. People have been killed. It's a completely different scenario.
Yeah, we've been speaking a lot about the livelihoods that would be that would be finished basically for the community there. But it's also the community that is at risk. Like if the mining project went through, the mine is about 200 to 500 meters away from the closest homes. So it's very close to the village. It's right on top of it. The noise and dust and disruption that it would provoke, along with capturing the water resources of the region, it would make it basically impossible to continue to live there. So people would have to leave. It's not going to be possible to build that community exactly as it is elsewhere. The sense of community that they have now would be lost. And that's like Anoushka was saying, the feeling of preemptive nostalgia. I believe that's one of the factors that is keeping people committed to the struggle, is knowing that it's not just that they would lose their livelihoods or their homes or the lands physically. It's also that they would lose each other, that the neighbors wouldn't be neighbors anymore. So yeah, that's a very relevant feature of this whole process that I believe is boosting the resistance to the project.
Can I just ask, in terms of how the company foresees the effects on the community, like, is it assumed that in the circumstance that the mine went ahead, the town would remain as it is, or how have they presented it in terms of their vision? Do they think that it's acceptable that the town would continue?
Yeah, basically they've presented it as unrealistically as possible. So they believe that the community would still remain and that they would employ the people from the community, but we're speaking about people that are mostly older, so over 40, and they wouldn't be retraining to be mining contractors. So, and also they're presenting this as a project that could perfectly live next to a village, and that's for that they've made some concessions, which is it's no, we don't see it that way, which would be that allegedly reduce the usage of water by reusing water from rainfall, so they would keep that water and then reuse it, and also that they wouldn't be provoking the explosions in the rock during the night, but that would still go on throughout all of the day. And yeah, nobody wants to live with constant noise from explosions. And so, yeah, as far as we're concerned there, it wouldn't be possible to co-live with a mining project of that dimension, because it's planned to be in operation for 12 years. And yeah, the explosions aren't going to stop because they're basically leveling a whole mountain, well, a mountain range, let's put it like that. So yeah, it wouldn't be a possibility, but it's been framed by the company, and it's been accepted as fact by the regulatory agency, which is, well, for me personally, that's really more outrageous, because we can understand the interest of the company in framing the situation like that, but that the regulatory agency actually pretends to buy that theory is actually more outrageous. Yeah.
I would probably have two aspects. One has to do with the technicalities, the other with the company's expectations when they arrived in Covas do Barroso. So with respect to the technicalities, despite the fact that I think EIAs are not proper tools for assessing impact, the fact that is that the EIA for this particular project is really, really, really bad. It's crazy how dust, noise, the blasts, everything, just the effects stop 1, 2, 3 meters from the nearest house.
This is the environmental impact assessment.
Yes.
But, yeah.
Yes, yeah. It's just it's a joke, honestly, and I know that the social impact assessment is always the less important. People who are in charge of evaluating these documents, they don't really care much about the social aspect of it. The social impact assessment in this EIA, it does not exist. And it's stated there, it says there, we don't have any environmental impact assessment. We are going to be doing it next. And the EIA was approved, even though there is no social impact assessment being done. And even though that is recognized in the document. So that's the level of the technical assessment that has been done on this project. And then this comes also to the company's expectations, because it's pretty clear now that Savannah arrived in Covas do Barroso. First, they didn't tell the people there was going to be a mine. Second, when people realized there was a mine, they thought the people would be just putting a red carpet and say, thank you for bringing us jobs. Thank you for bringing us development. and they completely misread reality. And this has been the big mistake for Savannah, because people there, they don't need the jobs in the mine. They don't want the jobs in the mine. And I'm saying this because in most resistance projects, the main challenge is that people actually need jobs. They need income. So having to question this jobs offer that is almost all the times an exaggerated one is difficult. Here, there's no difficulty. People don't need these jobs in the mine. People don't want to go work in the mine. There's no people available locally to work in the mine. So it's like, thank you, our offering is something we don't need, we don't want to destroy our community. So they completely failed in their assessment. I remember Katerina used to say how the investors, there's like this forum where the people who invest in Savannah talk about the project, about stocks. Someone just put there, oh no, they are protesting. Just wait when fridges start entering their houses, and resistance just goes away. So this is the level of thinking of these people, and they completely misread the community, how the capacity of the community to unite against this project, the community's expectations, and this has been good that they have completely misread the community.
Yeah, and presumably they're involved in other mining projects elsewhere where they've been able to have some success, and so they assumed that maybe it'll be a similar scenario. And
when they arrive, there's like the traditional cake that is eaten in Portugal in early January, and they just went and sent the cake to every house. This kind of things. That's what they were doing as part of the policy, just sending a cake to people's houses, and like the majority of people just sent the cake back or didn't accept it. So
custard tarts, pastéis de
no. It's like a different cake that is eaten in January. It's called the direct translation, the king's cake.
Is it like roscon that they have in Spain?
Yes, okay, like a roscon. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. But it's funny. No, it's funny how a company comes and thinks that this is going to work. It's just absurd. That's the level of thinking they have.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah, it doesn't quite make up for having a huge open cast mine on the.
It is insulting, yeah.
Yeah.
So we've spoken a lot about memory and emotions and the long-term feature of this struggle in the life of people living in this area. But one of the things we wanted to ask about now is the actual organisation of the struggle itself. So I'm not going to try and pronounce it in Portuguese because I know I'm going to butcher it, but the English translation is "No to the mine, yes to life."
Não às minas, sim à vida.
This has been one of the slogans for the mobilization against the mine, and in many other countries as well. It's a similar statement, but I wondered if you could talk a bit about the organizing structures that you deploy for the anti-mining efforts, and sort of maybe a bit about the facilitation methods that you use to bring people together.
Okay, so the resistance started as a real grassroots movement. It was basically just the people in the village. And then we started to get some other people interested and involved, and also trying to learn from other regions of the country and other regions in the world how the resistance is built, what we need. But again, this is done with very few resources, financial and human, but we've been able to gather a lot of allies, a lot of friends throughout the world. And third year that we're organizing a camp in Covas de Barroso that invites everyone to visit and find out about what we're doing. And also it other than involving the community with outsiders and with people that potentially want to get involved in the struggle, it also provides a lot of tools for everyone. so for outsiders and also for the community, and promotes very interesting discussions about what is done elsewhere and also what we've been doing and what we can do in the future. So it's going to be the third edition of this camp, where people who visit will be involved in the community processes and livelihood. They'll learn all about the place and about what we do there, how we live there, but also they'll bring the knowledge of other struggles around the world and how to build resistance and keep on building this resistance that we've managed to grow so far.
Carla mentioned it starts as a local struggle against this project, but then it develops links with other struggles throughout the world, especially through the Yes to Life, Not to Mining platform. And Catherine has been the liaison, the link with this network, also with other groups in other regions of Portugal and other solidarity groups throughout the world that have come mostly through the camp. I think probably in terms of organizing internally, it's interesting because the challenge is not on having unity against the mine. I think that is something that exists in Covas and Barroso. I'm talking now internally. People are against the mine and people are strong in their stance against the mining. The challenge is to have more people politically involved in resistance or involved in resistance on a daily basis. It has to do with structural aspects that are not exclusive to Portugal, like challenges to participation, difficulties on having people engaging in participating politically. But even though it's not something that only happens in Portugal, I think it's very strong here in Portugal. People are not used to engage politically, to participate in public life. And it shows on a daily basis in resistance. And I think that's probably one of the main challenges in organizing resistance is to have not more people against the mine. That's the good part we have, is having more people on a daily basis participating in the tasks of opposing this mine on a daily level.
Yeah, it's a difference between having support, but how much they're able to, or they feel able to get involved in the practices of doing things.
Especially on the daily requirements of resistance, because then some punctual, some sporadic aspects, the people come and people do participate, but there are tasks, there are responsibilities, there are things that need to be done daily. And when you have few people doing this, it's very tiring for the people to bear these responsibilities on their shoulders on a daily basis. Barroso, Barroso, Barroso. O povo tem de se unir.
So in Spain, at least, especially in the north of Spain, I'm familiar with a movement mobilizing against wind turbines and kind of using the narrative of yes to renewables, but not like this. So moving into the topic around the paradoxes and fallacies and hypocrisies in the extractive activities that come along with the minerals required for developing renewable energy infrastructure. So the practices involved with fossil fuel extraction have always been rooted in colonial and imperialist logics. And there's a lot of discussion around sacrifice zones amongst people and places that are deemed less important than the benefits of a resource that's being extracted. So the European Commission claims that it could introduce targets into legislation, for example, that at least 30% of the EU's demand for refined lithium should originate from the EU by 2030. I was doing a bit of research around it, and there's currently 10 potentially viable lithium projects in the EU, and 3 of them are in Portugal. And that researchers suggest that if all of these plants become operational, it would probably be enough for the EU to have the majority of its own supply. But then obviously the biggest question that kind of looms within this scramble is whose lives and what ecological systems will be disrupted, harmed, or even erased through this process. So I wanted to pose it to you that the proposed mining project, in your case, can be seen as yet another example of corporate enclosure of land within a broader green capitalist agenda, as we've already mentioned a little bit about, which looks at technology as being the savior. And so I just wondered if, and I want to put it to both of you as well, to get both of your experiences about how you make sense of the need for transition justice in all of this, because on the one hand there is the issue in the background of outsourcing the impacts of energy consumption from Europe and the need for a renewable energy transition, but then on the other hand to address the means through which these energies are currently being developed. And so there's a lot within that to kind of unpack, but I would really like to get your thoughts on these topics.
I think that it's frequent to read or listen to people saying that the people opposing this project, Covas and Barroso, are opposing the carbonization policies and the transition. It's actually insulting that a place that has been an example for generations of fighting climate change is now being accused of opposing the decarbonization policies. And it's a false narrative, actually, because everyone talks about we'll need more lithium, we need more critical raw materials. So they talk about how we supply them, and no one is talking about the demand. Obviously, if the policy, and you just look at the mobility strategy in Europe, says, okay, we're going to do a technology transition. We're not doing an energy transition or decarbonization. It's a technology transition from fossil fuels to electric vehicles. That's what's being proposed. You might have in the mobility strategy some nice words about diversification in public transportation and so on, but that's just wishful thinking and no concrete measures in that direction. So obviously, when your choice of policy is just to transition from one technology to the other, because of course you cannot threaten the interests of the car industry, which is so strong in Europe. As they say in that same document, it represents, I don't know how many percent of the GDP, but when they're saying this is important, we're not going to touch this. Obviously, that you need a certain supply of lithium. Instead, if your policy would go in a different direction, prioritize public transportation, then you will need less electric vehicles and you'll need much less lithium, and probably you wouldn't have to open new mines for this. So it's a political decision here. And it's a false narrative when they say that this is necessary for decarbonization. This is only necessary if that's the only way. We're going back to this TINA idea, there is no other alternative. This is the alternative, and you have to comply with this alternative. If you don't comply, you are against ending up fossil fuels. And people here are very conscious and saying, no, we are not against the energy transition. We are against this transition, which means that the costs are being displaced. Because, yeah, it's true, we have a problem with fossil fuels. We have climate change as an issue. We have the problem of emissions in the cities as well, especially in the cities. But we are just displacing the impacts to new regions. We are creating new sacrifice zones. And this can't be acceptable. And this doesn't need to be the way. There are other, if we are willing to tackle the economic interests, but that's something capitalism doesn't want to do. So they are presenting this as the only solution.
And yes, building on what Francisco was saying, sacrifice zones is very important topic here, because the region where Covas do Barroso is integrated in the country, it has already been considered sort of a sacrifice zone. We're responsible for a lot of the clean energy that is produced with windmills, with dams. So a lot of that energy is already being produced here. And also, as I said in the beginning, we're very, very much in a disadvantaged in terms of public services. So public transport, health, education, and it's all services that are not readily available for the population there. So in the Portuguese ecosystem, we're already the underdog. And then if you take it to a broader perspective in the EU, then Portugal is also an underdog, and it's also a place that can be, well, I would say it's expendable. And the idea is also that some places are expendable and others are not. And usually the very urban and developed places are never expendable. And those are the ones that are actually emitting the most emissions, right? The most carbon emissions. And again, as Francisco said, we're not with this transition in commas. We're not trying to save the planet. This is not a plan that would allow to the planet to be saved, or better yet, humanity to be saved. The planet will probably still be here very long after we're gone. What we're doing here is not saving the environment or reversing the climate change. What the plan is, not what we're doing, but what the plan apparently is to transition into a new form of movement, of locomotion that does still imply that the car industry is alive and well, that everyone gets their own car, and that's not a transition. That's keeping things exactly as they are, but instead of exhausting fossil fuels, you're exhausting then lithium and whatever comes next in the list. So you keep exploring the planet for, of course, different resources, but still, so nothing is changing. Nothing is transitioning. So the sacrifice zone is for nothing. And Covas do Barroso is going to be destroyed, and many other places have been and are going to be destroyed. And we don't feel like that's fair. To keep things exactly as they are, to make sure that capitalism is alive, that the car industry is alive and well. And I know that represents a lot of jobs. Our jobs are also important. We can't be sacrificing one thing for the other, for another one, and not giving a good enough excuse for that, or a good enough explanation, or not even being honest about it, because that's what we're doing. We're just replacing the exploits that we're doing on the planet to keep everything just the way it is. I'd like to tell everyone that even though electric cars are kind of a novelty still, I know they're much more available now, but they're still a novelty. But there's already been for a few years a competition that's similar to Formula One with electric cars. That's a sport, apparently. That's not where we should be spending the lithium that we already have. Not on a sport, not on a entertainment for very rich people, for billionaires. It's not reasonable use of lithium. And we're also not investing in recycling the lithium that's already been extracted. Climate justice comes in there, because Covas do Barroso is actually a very good example of how you can be sustainable and you can respect the land and be respected back. So we feel like we should be treated as an example and not as a sacrifice land.
You mentioned something important, Carla, is obviously it's not just the weight of the car industry in the GDP, is all of the number of people working in this industry. So I think that needs to be something it's something that needs to be addressed. But having that in mind, we shouldn't be talking about sacrifice zones. We should be talking about sacrificing industries. And the car industry and the idea of everyone has their own private electric vehicle needs to be sacrificed urgently. Otherwise, we are just displacing problems somewhere else.
Yeah, thank you, Francisco and Carla. How can people find out more, or what should people do if they want to sort of support what you're doing or know more about it?
We have a website and also social network accounts that people can visit. You'll find a lot of information there, of course, and also what we've been doing, what we plan to do next. And yeah, people can always contact us directly if they want to get involved or if they want to ask about us, if they like to broadcast our voice like you're doing. We really appreciate it. It's a very important thing. Francisco, do you have anything to add?
Yes, one is this Barroso Seminars, which means Barroso without minds, is the website for the camp that happens every year now. It's third edition this year. So maybe people have the chance to come, or maybe next year. We hope there's one next year. It's tiring to organize this, and it's been 3 years, so we don't know. And there's many ways you can help, actually, and I think it's important. You can support by disseminating the information. You can write us with ideas for how you could support us. I think one of the most important aspects, even though we have a legal team working on the case, but I always insist in this, it's totally different to have as well people who have legal expertise, but at the same time are engaged in these struggles. And I think we are missing this. It's extremely important to have activists, anti-mining activists who know about the legal aspects, especially the legal aspects in Europe and in Portugal, who can support us. We desperately need that, to have someone who is supporting us legally and is also committed to this struggle. It's not doing just as a part of a professional relationship. This makes a huge, huge difference. And I think it's probably, if I would prioritize our needs at the moment, this would be one of them. So if some people will be listening to this podcast or contacts who might be working on these aspects, I invite you to contact us and support us.
I just wanted to say, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating to hear about what you've been doing, and incredibly inspiring, but also, yeah, we recognize that you've gone through a lot. So I really, really appreciated hearing about it, and hope that people will be able to get on board and connect to what you're doing if they're able to, and if that's something that they feel that they can commit to.
Yeah, I also think it's important to recognize as well, I really appreciate talking us through the emotional side of it all. I mean, I know that you've spoken to many people about this topic over and over. It's also, it's an emotional labor to have to keep reliving your past lived experiences of it. So I'm really grateful that you've shared that with us today.
All welcome to go and come and visit Covas anytime. The only big risk of doing it is that you probably want to stay.
Can